Now, I want you to tell me that this ain't so. I believe it was Ronald Reagan. I'm sure he was advised to do so, but he created something called the President's Working Group on Financial Matters. We today call this group the Plunge Protection Team, PPT. Not populist token, PPT, the Plunge Protection Team. Their job is to make sure when markets plunge, they step in and pump you up or pump the markets up. So what if I told you, according to Zero Hedge, that a former Plunge Protection Team member warns blockchain technology, Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc., is freaking governments out? Dr. Pippa Malmgren, a U.S. policy analyst and former member of the Working Group on Financial Markets. Did I say financial matters? Maybe it was financial markets. A government entity better known as the Plunge Protection Team appeared on Eric Townsend's Macro Voices podcast to discuss Bitcoin and the European refugee crisis, while also offering some clues about how the Plunge Protection Team, famous for its secrecy, actually operates. On the financial implications of Europe's refugee crisis. Townsend started the interview by asking Malmgren, who also served as a special assistant to the president during the Obama administration, her thoughts about the thousands of refugees who continue to pour into Europe. Surprisingly, despite her liberal views regarding the free movement of people, Malmgren said she's quite worried about the crisis and believes it will only worsen as governments in North Africa become increasingly unstable, potentially leading to a financial crisis in Europe. So Eric says, what do you see the outcome of this refugee crisis being? We had Italy the other day threatening to issue EU visas to refugees to force other countries to do their part to absorb more people. We have seen German politics affected by what seems like a growing divide in the German populace in their attitude towards accepting refugees. What did I say? MLS, this going, I don't know what, maybe that's a misspelling. Is this going to lead to a bigger, maybe it's meant is this going to lead to a bigger problem, or is it coming under control? And Miss Pippa says, I think there is a much bigger problem in immigration coming. To be clear, I am actually in favor of the freest possible movement of people, which means human capital and goods, and capital across borders. But there are always limits, and the socially accepted limits seem to be in flux right now across Western Europe. Here's the problem. We are not just talking about the magnitude of refugees we have already seen. We are talking about what's coming. And so this is where the Italian threat is very important. They basically said, look, nobody is helping us, and we get all of them because of our geographical location. So unless you guys give us a hand here, then they are just going to issue them, we are just going to issue them papers and then let them loose. We can go anywhere, or not we, they can go anywhere they want in Western Europe. That is, of course, a bit scary for the rest of Western Europe, which would prefer to have the problem contained. But they are not prepared to help Italy in the containment process, just as they weren't particularly prepared to give Greece any extra money to deal with their refugee problem, which happens for the same reason. But this is the beginning, she says. The bigger issue is that you still have a buildup of immigration happening in Turkey, and the Turks have also been very threatening, saying if you don't give us what we want, and we have got a long list of things, then we might have parts of the border that there's just nobody to police it that afternoon. And suddenly you get a big wave. But even more important than that, I now see Northern Africa becoming more destabilized. So Algeria, Libya, and Egypt all becoming a little more wobbly and unstable. Well, that's funny. Let me stop here. 3 of those countries, being Egypt and Libya, were on Lindsey Williams' list in 2010 saying in 5 months from now, 4 to 5 months, I've been told, we, America, are going to overthrow stealthily these following countries. And he named them in order. And by chance, Egypt and Libya were in there. And they had their Arab Spring uprising, remember that? Which was staged. We did this in America. But now they're destabilized. Isn't that what Russia told us? Every time you guys get in somewhere involved, which is why you need to stay out of Syria, the place becomes destabilized every single time. Vladimir Putin was saying that when Obama was president. And he's right. So anyways, those three are all becoming a little more wobbly and unstable. And that wave of immigration, I think, could begin to dwarf what we have already seen. In addition to that, there's also the fact that everybody in Africa has registered that it is possible to get to the north. Of course, all of them would like to because they're not stupid. They completely understand that there's a potentially better quality of life and much greater opportunity. It is not just a temporary phenomenon. It is now that people in that part of the world have begun to register, I can get to Europe. Look, turn on CNN, oh gosh, and you will see, which they can all do these days because they have got the telephone in their pocket, the television is on their phone. This is the key thing, the realization that movement may be worth it. They are saying now in parts of even sub-Saharan Africa that the greatest luxury good, the thing a person will buy when they have any extra money, is passage to Europe. And so this is why there's a really big question about what is the European Union's immigration policy. Do they really have one? Or do they really believe in this concept of having basically no borders whatsoever? I think it is a big debate. A lot of Europeans are like, we never signed up for a world where we had no borders at all. Others say once you are inside the border, you are in. So let's think about something. This is a former member of the Plunge protection team, the President's Working Group on Financial Markets, as I said, matters. Are you telling me that this lady just got done saying all those things in her job previously at some point was part of the Plunge protection team? How in the hell would she even have an opinion, like an official opinion, on this kind of stuff? The hell does this have to do with what her job was? Unless she was picked long ago because she is part of the team, and now she's out of there, but since she's still part of the team, knows what's happening, and now needs to go and speak. So, let's see what she has to say about cryptocurrencies. On the rise of blockchain and cryptocurrencies and the fall of dollar hegemony. That's the title of this next section. Moving on, Townsend took the conversation in a direction that he said might be outside of Malmgren's comfort zone. The rise of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. Contrary to his expectations, Malmgren said she's been closely following the increasing use of cryptocurrencies, adding that they will likely play a role in determining who dominates the global economy, and therefore determines the monetary framework after precipitating the next big paradigm shift, which will lead the world away from the dollar-based framework that exists today. Governments like China and Russia, which are seeking to create their own digital currencies, pose a greater threat to the long-term dominance of the dollar than they or the U.S. realize. Now, for this discussion, I'd say she's certainly qualified to talk about. She should definitely know these kinds of things, or at least be able to hold the conversation and give her expert, official opinion. President's Working Group on Financial Markets, Bitcoin, that goes in line there. But the cross-border immigration stuff sounds like, So Eric says, I want to shift gears now to a topic I didn't used to think of as particularly geopolitically oriented, which of course is your area of expertise, and that is cryptocurrencies. In the beginning, Pippa, if you look at what Bitcoin was at the very beginning, it was something only interested extreme libertarians who were very interested in financial privacy. Nobody else was paying attention to it. It was designed really to usurp the ability of government to interfere with and control people's finances. It seems that is almost going through a complete transformation where now we have the Ethereum guy, I forget his name, he says, but meeting with Putin, talking about some kind of partnership to create a digital cryptocurrency that will become a national currency for Russia. Meanwhile, People's Bank of China is advertising to hire blockchain engineers to help to design the digital yuan or digital RMB. So all of a sudden, it seems like what's going on, and I don't remember the gentleman's name, but there was someone from the People's Bank of China, a very senior official, saying it was time for central banks to stop ignoring cryptocurrencies and recognize that we have got to take the lead and we have got to be in charge of these things and design what we want them to be. Where is this going? It seems like to me this is a game changer if national governments are going to get behind cryptocurrency. Where does this take us? To which she replies, Mrs. Pippa. Pippa says, totally. I think it is a massive market and geopolitical issue. I have written a little article about this, which I put up on LinkedIn, where I said you have got to understand if the size of your debt problem is so big that it can't be paid off, and in fact, even inflation, which is the usual way you would seek to default on your debt slowly over time, you can't get enough inflation generated. Then there is one further option, and that is you literally abandon the entire system of money and accounting. I know that sounds unbelievably radical, but we have seen it happen before, she says. I explained the example of Britain in 1834, when they abandoned the traditional system that they had used for 1,000 years at the time, which was called the tally stick system. So when we say we tally things up, or the word stock market refers to the use of little wooden stocks, they were little pieces of wood on which you would record every transaction during your life, every borrowing, every lending deal, every asset acquisition, every tax payment. The way it worked was it was literally a wooden board. You cracked it in half, roughly, so the two sides definitively matched and couldn't be faked. Then the borrower and the lender each marked all their transactions. The stock end was always the smaller end, so that's where we get stock market. There was a market in the stocks, these little wooden sticks. Bottom line was, why would you abandon a system that has worked perfectly, beautifully for 1,000 years? The answer is you had 200 years of war debts that had accumulated. They were unable to get inflation up without causing social unrest. And so the government said, let's take the tally sticks back and give people this great new innovation called paper money. You can imagine everyone said, I'm going to hand over this record, this ledger of my entire net worth, and you're going to give me a piece of paper? Really? This is a joke. In the end, what the government had to do was confiscate. Of course, that's what government always does. Confiscate the tally sticks, and they took them to Parliament to burn them. They misjudged how much heat the fire would throw off, and that is what caused Parliament to burn to the ground in 1834. It was the destruction of the system of accounting and money. In its place, we adopted what we now use, which is a piece of paper we call cash. Today, we are on the brink of similar step change. Or did she mean steep? Whatever, it says step. Step change. And the way you will do it is you move to electronic money in conjunction with blockchain. Blockchain is the new ledger, and e-money is the new currency. The question is, whose e-money? So everybody in government circles have been watching the Indian experience, because the Prime Minister stepped up to the platform in early November and basically said, we are going to move all of you, 1 billion people, off paper money and onto electronic money, and we are going to do it in 3 months. They did it, and they did it successfully. Now hold on, what? And they made poor people even poorer when they did so, by the way, because they couldn't get to the banks and switch out the $100 bills for new ones, or $100 rupees, whatever. Or was it the 500 note? I forget. Anyways, now governments everywhere are saying we want to do that, because guess what happens when you move to e-money? First of all, you really eliminate the black market, because you can't transact anymore without it being seen. And so, for example, the European Union are talking heavily about moving to electronic money, because then all this black market activity that happens in Greece and Italy where there's no tax, we will be able to get all the tax revenue off of it. That's one reason. The second reason is with blockchain, you have total transparency over every single step of a transaction. Complete provenance of every single transaction. The question is who gets to see it? I think this is where governments are suddenly a little schizo, because on the one side they think they are going to have the ability to see every transaction that you and I and all the listeners are engaged in. But Ethereum has created this platform where actually they won't necessarily be in government's hands, maybe in private hands. And I'll tell you what, that's the best place for it to be. That's my comment. So she says, the question is, can you trust the private hands who are issuing ethers as much or more as you trust governments? My answer, I can't trust the government as far as I could throw it. I would rather absolutely, positively trust in something that's in private hands than the governments, because you see their track record and what they do with everything they freaking touch. It doesn't turn to gold, it turns to a pile of stinking horse manure. So she continues on. So governments are being to say, let's create, or I think she went beginning to say, let's create our own version. And that's where you get the People's Bank of China saying we've got to control this, because otherwise you are going to end up with private sector currencies that possibly are trusted more than government currencies, and that will lead to transactions offline that governments can't see. There was a report going around the internet recently about some guy who made $200 million trading on Ethereum in a month. And the question was, who will tax that? The answer is nobody. That freaks government out, to say the least, particularly given their debt situation. So I think this is a huge, huge thing, and all investors have to think very carefully about it. Well, let me reply to that statement. They don't have $200 million in their pocket. They have this thing sitting over here. If they don't sell any of it on an actual exchange, that might be on today's value worth $200 million. Therefore, when they go to sell it off in an exchange for money back, that's going to be logged, and they'll know exactly who got that money. Why? Because when you and I and everyone else signs up to an exchange, and I'm not talking about the kind where you can just flip Bitcoin for this coin and that coin back for that coin. I'm talking about places like Coinbase, Gemini, etc., where you got to give them your license, you got to give them your bank information, you give them all this information so that you can sell off the Ethereum and then put it in your bank account. So someone's going to get taxed at that point. And I don't think she covered that at all. So anyways, the question then is, who has most transparency over the blockchain and e-money? And I would argue it's going to be whoever has the most and fastest processing power, which may be governments at times, it may be private at times, it may be fluid. That's what we have to think about as investors. So there's some more to this article, but that's the main thing. I don't need to, beat this dead horse anymore. Off to the next one. Take care.